Backyard Professor Chess videos. I'm going to do some more Chessercise tactics with you. Tactics, they say, are the soul of chess. So we're going to analyze this board and take a look at what is going on. Explain the imbalances, show you the similarities and differences, and try to see if we can discover something that, because of our knowledge of the board, we can figure out how to play this particular position. Black was like this. White has come up, put the black king in check. And this is basically a typical standard opening. You'll see positions like this similarly in many games. Black comes and he blocks the bishop's check. Now it's at this point that black is expecting white to exchange the bishops. And in a way, why not? Because he does have a pawn here that's on the white square, and so that is his bad bishop. And of course, we can see that that's black's bad bishop. So black wouldn't mind if white exchanges with him. He's got a pin here on the knight against the queen, right? That's a pretty wicked looking pin. It's an interesting board situation because both players have central emphasis. This pawn is pinned to the queen by this black bishop. He was here and he was pinning that pawn. Now he's pinning this knight, right? This knight isn't developed. He's going to have a tough time developing if this pawn doesn't take that pawn. He hasn't castled. Neither side has castled. So we're kind of in the beginning of the game here, right? What would you do if you were white? This is a great little lesson. When we look at the boards and we see peculiarities, we need to pay attention. That's why you want to pay attention to the board. We have a pin. We have another pin here, right? Two pins in one game. Now, when you have a piece that's pinned, the best thing you can do is attack that pinned piece, right? So white presses his e-pawn forward, attacking the pinned knight. Boy, that plane motor's loud. He's up there 5 miles and I can still hear him from here. It's a crystal clear, beautiful day. This puts enormous pressure on black here. Isn't that fun to see? He's pinning the knight and now he's attacking the knight. And now black has to think pretty quick on his feet, doesn't he? Just look how bold this central pawn thrust is. He's attacking the pawn, or the knight, and he opened up the queen to attack that bishop, which is blocking him from taking that rook. But because this bishop is pinned, he can't come and take that queen. So there's going to be some very interesting fireworks going on in this position, isn't there? Black, figuring he's going to alleviate the pressure, takes the bishop with the bishop. And white, continuing the pressure and the threats because of the pin, takes that knight with that pawn. Now what makes this so interesting is, now white threatens to take the g-pawn the next time, with devastating results, because he would be getting to the queen and he would be getting to the rook with his pawn. So these pins are very important ways to tactically really pound your opponent. Black has to push that pawn to stop that kind of an opening to pin and threaten and really get clobbered. And in fact, white goes ahead and clobbers him anyway because he reaches up here and takes the rook. So he's got an entire rook for free because he had so many different pieces pinned and black resigned. That's a fun Chessercise, isn't it? A fun tactic to pin a piece and then attack the piece. Let me show you another one. When we find ourselves in this kind of a position, a situation, we have to pay attention. White's pawn, the isolated pawn, has become a weakness. Or has it? Isolated pawns, as a general rule, if they can be blockaded, which this one is, the queen has come down, that pawn can't march forward, they're normally considered weak. But wait a sec, got a great central knight outpost that pawn is supporting while the queen supports the pawn, right? You've got doubled pawns over here by the king, and he's moved up in his little fortress. This king has moved up behind his pawns. Material is basically even, except that black is a pawn down. They both have the queens and they each have a minor piece. Right now, white's minor piece is vastly superior to black's, but the board is open. So don't get excited against black. It'll be very easy for him to bring up this bishop and have devastating effects here, right? So that bishop is easy to improve. Well, it's white's move. And he's examining this situation. Each of us have a weakness on this side and this side. This is not necessarily a weakness. There's virtually nothing attacking it technically. The queen does come down to here. It's going to be this pawn he attacks in order for it to be a weakness. But white decides, you know, I'd like to change off queens because I think honestly I can win this game without the queens. So white comes up here to swap the queens. And black kind of goes, wait a sec, hasn't he just given up support for that pawn? I can catch up, I'm a pawn behind. So black goes ahead and takes that pawn. He says, all right, now we're even. Are we? Take a careful look when your opponent has a knight like this in an open field like this. It's even harder to see with a closed field. But in an open field like this, you better be very, very careful about what your opponent offers you, because white deliberately offered him that pawn. Because now he has the absolutely crushing response of a knight fork. Check to the king, and either the queen or the bishop goes down. Right? Preferably the queen in this kind of game. Whatever it is the king does, the little lady is gone. And now white has a one game. So that's another tactic that's probably trickier to see, but awfully fun to see put into effect. Just something to keep your mind on. I have another one I want to show you. This particular position is quite tricky. I really like these kind of positions because they teach us to pay attention to details, right? And we have to pay attention to details on this. It's black's move. Now we can see we're in the beginning of the game. Black has a great outpost here. It's not a permanent outpost, of course not. The pawn can come up and threaten the knight, right? Kick him off his perch. He's got another knight here to come in, though. His queen's developed well. His queen's back over here. He hasn't developed the rook. He hasn't developed that rook yet. Their development is roughly even. They've both castled, right? We've got a good central pawn movement on both sides. So at this point, it's relatively even. Now black makes a peculiar move here. Black presses the pawn to c4. And white scratches his head and he says, what, have I missed anything? You always want to double check and make sure you don't miss anything. If I take that pawn, will that be okay? It's unguarded, right? Says, well, okay. Got me a free pawn. That's not bad. Now black moves the knight over here to e5. And white's saying, well, yeah, all right, he's attacking my c pawn now. My c pawn is unguarded, so maybe it's just black's fancy way of exchanging a pawn, right? So white says, well, I can support the pawn. b2 to b3. And now he's not going to take that pawn, right? But black wasn't going after that pawn. Black has a much more interesting move to make. Can you spot that move? This is where learning how to do some calculation is important, and we'll get into doing that more. For now, it's critical to get a foundation of learning the imbalances and how they affect us. In this instance, the tactic here is brilliant. It's phenomenal. Black drops his knight to f3, check. You're going, really? He's going to do that? So the bishop says, well, all right, I'll take the knight. And now black takes the bishop and goes check. And notice that he's got the bishop and the king is in check, and he also has another bishop that is unguarded. This is why you always want to look the pieces over to see what's guarded and what's not. So white says, well, you know, I can move out of the problem and I can move out of check. But now the problem is, because of that dastardly knight, he takes the bishop, and now he's forking the queen and the rook. That is a spectacular example of tactics with knights. I would recommend you study the tactics with knights carefully. Watch this video several times so that you can see how he saw ahead of time to manipulate such powerful knight forks. And of course, black went on to win. The queen's got to come here. She can't come here because, and now look, now the rook is also in trouble. Which rook do you want? This one or that one? It doesn't matter. You're going to lose your rook, because if you don't take that, well, that's all right. Yeah, you're going to lose a rook. I would move the rook out. Get that rook out of the way from that bishop. You don't want to lose both rooks. Let him try to keep his knight. He can't move it back here or here, so technically speaking, he's going to take that pawn. Take out what you can if your piece is stuck, right? So that white will be in this situation, but now the situation is dire because black is up an entire rook, and he's got the central pawns here. He can push for a central thrust, open some files. He's got an open file here with his queen. Now he's going to start pushing his rooks on open files, right? Because that's where rooks belong. I say that every video because I mean it. That works. If you're not doing that in your games, you're a fool. That's all there is to it. So there's some tactical ideas that kind of warm you up to the fun and the pleasure of tactics, which is part of the Silman system. Although he doesn't emphasize tactics so much in his books, he wrote a book on chess tactics with Yasser Seirawan. I would highly recommend that book also. Any book with the name Jeremy Silman on, I would say you would do well to purchase, especially since he co-authored it with one of the world's great grandmasters, Yasser Seirawan. So thanks for watching my Backyard Professor Chess videos. Happy chessercising, happy checkmating, and I will see you in the next video.
Thank you.